The late afternoon sun painted the Wyoming prairie in shades of gold and amber, as Sarah Bennett watched the lone figure approaching her struggling homestead on foot, leading a lame horse with obvious care and patience. She had been hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she first spotted him, and her immediate instinct was to reach for the rifle that her late husband had taught her to keep always within arm's reach. 2 years had passed since Jacob Bennett's death from pneumonia, leaving Sarah alone with their 8-year-old son, Michael, to manage 40 acres of stubborn prairie land that seemed determined to resist every attempt at cultivation. The neighboring ranchers had made it clear that a widow and a child had no business trying to hold onto property that real men could put to better use. But Sarah's stubborn pride refused to accept defeat. The stranger was tall and lean, with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent years under the harsh western sun. His clothes were worn but clean, his hat pulled low over his face, and his movements carried the careful economy of a man who understood that wasted energy could mean the difference between survival and death in frontier country. What struck Sarah most forcefully was the gentle way he handled his injured horse, speaking softly to the animal and checking its leg with obvious expertise. A man who treated animals with such consideration was probably not an immediate threat, though Sarah had learned through hard experience that appearances could be deceiving. "Ma'am?" the stranger called out when he was close enough to be heard without shouting, keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. "I don't mean any trouble. My horse threw a shoe about 5 miles back and came up lame. I was hoping you might have some water I could give him." Sarah studied the man carefully, noting the absence of visible weapons beyond a working knife on his belt and the genuine concern in his voice when he mentioned the horse. Michael had emerged from the cabin at the sound of voices, his young face showing curiosity rather than fear. "There's a trough by the barn," Sarah replied, gesturing toward the weathered structure that had seen better days. "Help yourself. The pump handle sticks sometimes, but it works if you're patient with it." The stranger touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Thank you kindly, ma'am. Name's James Coulter, and I appreciate the hospitality." As Coulter led his horse toward the water trough, Sarah noticed him taking in the details of the homestead with the practiced eye of someone who understood ranch operations. She saw him observe the broken gate hanging at an awkward angle from one hinge, the section of fence that had collapsed during last month's windstorm, and the pile of firewood that needed splitting before winter arrived in earnest. Michael followed Coulter to the barn, his natural curiosity overcoming the shyness that usually kept him close to his mother around strangers. Sarah could hear them talking, though she couldn't make out the words, and she saw Coulter showing her son how to check a horse's leg for injury. After the horse had drunk its fill, Coulter examined the animal's hoof with careful attention. Sarah approached as he was finishing his inspection, surprised to find herself less wary than she had been initially. "How bad is it?" she asked, nodding toward the horse's injured leg. "Not terrible, but not something I can fix without proper tools," Coulter replied honestly. "He needs a new shoe, and that leg should rest for a day or two before I put any weight on him. Is there a blacksmith nearby?" Sarah shook her head. "Nearest town is Jackson's Crossing, about 15 miles east. There's a smith there, but it's too far to walk with a lame horse." Coulter nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. "Then I'll camp here tonight, if you don't mind. Let him rest and head out at first light. I can pay for the water and any feed you can spare." "That won't be necessary," Sarah found herself saying, surprising herself with the offer. "You can sleep in the barn, and there's hay enough for your horse. Payment for water seems foolish when the good Lord provides it free from the ground." As Coulter was settling his horse in the barn, Sarah noticed him pause beside the broken gate, examining the damaged hinge with professional interest. Without asking permission or announcing his intentions, he pulled some basic tools from his saddlebag and began working on the repair. "You don't have to do that," Sarah called out. But Coulter simply smiled and continued working. "Can't help myself." "Ma'am," he replied, his hands moving with practiced skill. "Spent 20 years as a ranch foreman before circumstances changed." Seeing something broken that I can fix makes my fingers itch. Michael watched with fascination as Coulter straightened the bent hinge, reinforced the gate's frame with scrap wood from the barn, and restored the structure to proper working order. The repair took less than an hour, but the result transformed what had been an eyesore into something functional and solid. "There," Coulter said with satisfaction, testing the gate's swing. "Should last you another few years at least." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes as she looked at the repaired gate, remembering how Jacob had built it during their first year on the homestead and how its gradual deterioration had seemed to symbolize everything that was falling apart since his death. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's been broken for months. I didn't have the knowledge or the strength to fix it properly." Coulter's expression showed understanding rather than pity. "Running a place like this alone isn't easy, ma'am. You're doing better than most would in your circumstances." As evening approached, Sarah found herself inviting Coulter to join them for supper, a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork that was all she could manage with their limited resources. The stranger accepted gratefully, and the three of them sat around the rough wooden table in the cabin's main room. Michael, usually quiet around adults, began asking Coulter questions about his travels and experiences. The cowboy answered patiently, sharing stories about different ranches where he'd worked and lessons he'd learned about livestock and land management. Sarah noticed that he never mentioned why he was traveling alone or where he was heading, and she respected his privacy enough not to ask. After dinner, Coulter insisted on helping with the dishes despite Sarah's protests. As he worked, she noticed his eyes frequently moving to the long list of repairs that the homestead desperately needed: the leaking roof, the broken plow blade, the fence that needed mending. "Ma'am," Coulter said carefully, "I know it's not my place to suggest this, but if you'd allow me to stay a few days while my horse recovers, I could help with some of these repairs. Wouldn't be charity, just a fair trade for the hospitality you've shown me." Sarah's pride warred with her practical need for help, and practicality won. "If you're serious about the offer, I'd be grateful for the assistance. Lord knows there's more work here than one woman and a boy can handle." That evening, as Coulter made his way to the barn to sleep, Sarah found herself setting the table for the next day's breakfast. Almost without thinking, she laid out 3 plates instead of the 2 that had become her routine since Jacob's death. The simple act felt significant in a way she couldn't quite explain, as if she was acknowledging that their tiny family circle had expanded to include this quiet stranger who had appeared like an answer to prayers she hadn't quite known how to voice. Dawn came with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the Wyoming sky seem infinite, and Sarah woke to the sound of someone already working in the yard. Through her window, she could see James Coulter examining the collapsed section of fence, measuring and calculating with the focused attention of a craftsman planning his approach. By the time Sarah and Michael had dressed and started preparing breakfast, Coulter had already milked their cow, something Sarah usually did as her first morning chore. The pail of fresh milk sat on the porch with a piece of paper weighted down by a stone. "Hope you don't mind. Old habits die hard." JC over breakfast, which Sarah noticed Coulter ate with genuine appreciation rather than the polite tolerance most people showed for her modest cooking. They discussed the most urgent repairs the homestead needed. The list was daunting: the collapsed fence, the leaking roof that would become a serious problem when winter snows arrived, the broken plow blade that prevented her from preparing fields for spring planting, and a dozen smaller issues that accumulated when there was only one pair of hands to address an endless stream of problems. "We'll start with the fence," Coulter decided. "Can't have your livestock wandering off, and a good fence makes the difference between a working ranch and just a collection of broken buildings." Michael appointed himself Coulter's assistant, following the cowboy around with eager attention and asking endless questions about ranching, horses, and the wider world beyond their isolated homestead. Coulter answered every question with patience, treating the 8-year-old's curiosity with the same respect he would show an adult's inquiries. Sarah watched them work together while she attended to her own chores: laundry, cooking, tending the vegetable garden that provided most of their food, and the countless other tasks that filled a frontier woman's day. She noticed how Coulter moved through the work with quiet competence, never complaining or seeking praise, simply doing what needed to be done with the dedication of someone who took pride in craftsmanship. By the end of the first day, the collapsed fence had been rebuilt and reinforced. By the end of the second day, Coulter had patched the worst leaks in the roof and sharpened every dull tool in the barn. On the third day, he borrowed Sarah's wagon and rode to a neighboring ranch, returning with materials to repair the broken plow blade and several other items that Sarah's limited resources had prevented her from acquiring. "Mr. Henderson owed me a favor from years back," Coulter explained when Sarah questioned how he had obtained the supplies. He was happy to settle the debt. Each evening, they ate dinner together at the rough wooden table, with Sarah setting 3 plates as naturally as if Coulter had always been part of their household. The conversations grew less guarded as the days passed, with Coulter sharing carefully edited stories from his past, and Sarah opening up about the challenges of maintaining the homestead alone. "Jacob and I had such plans for this place," Sarah said one evening after Michael had gone to bed. "We were going to build a real house, expand the herd, maybe even plant an orchard. But then he got sick, and everything fell apart so fast." Coulter listened without offering the empty platitudes that most people relied on when confronted with grief. "Sometimes life takes everything we've built and scatters it like ashes in the wind," he said quietly. "The question is whether we give up or start building again. And which one are you doing?" Sarah asked, sensing the pain that Coulter kept carefully hidden beneath his calm exterior. "Still figuring that out," he admitted. "I had a wife once and a daughter. They died in a diphtheria outbreak 5 years ago. After that, I just started drifting, working different ranches, never staying long enough to put down roots. The shared losses created a bond between them that went deeper than the practical partnership of rancher and helping hand. They were both survivors trying to figure out how to keep living after the people who had made life meaningful were gone." On the 5th day, Michael asked the question that Sarah had been carefully avoiding. "Mr. Coulter, are you going to leave when your horse gets better?" Coulter paused in his work, his hand still on the fence post he was setting. "That was the original plan, son. I'm a drifter, not a settler. Staying in one place too long makes me restless. But we need you," Michael said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Mama works so hard, but she can't do everything alone. And you're good at fixing things." Sarah felt her face flushing with embarrassment. "Michael, Mr. Coulter has his own life to live. We can't expect him to stay just because we have work that needs doing." But that evening, as Sarah was setting the table for dinner, she found herself hesitating before placing the 3rd plate. The temporary arrangement had begun to feel permanent, and the thought of going back to just 2 plates seemed suddenly unbearable. Coulter noticed her hesitation. "Ma'am, I've been thinking about what Michael said. About staying." Sarah's heart rate increased as she waited for him to continue. "I know you're managing alone out of necessity rather than choice," Coulter said carefully. "And I know that having a man around would make the work easier and probably safer too, given how some of your neighbors have been suggesting you should sell." "Where is this leading?" Sarah asked, though she thought she knew. "I'm proposing a partnership," Coulter replied. "Not romantic, just practical. I work the place alongside you, help with the heavy labor and the improvements it needs. In return, I get a home again, something I haven't had in 5 years." Sarah considered the proposal carefully. "People will talk. A widow and an unmarried man living on the same property. Let them talk," Coulter said with a slight smile. "Frontier gossip never stopped anyone from doing what needed to be done. Sarah must decide whether to let the drifter stay. Will she accept the partnership that could save her homestead? Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to see how this story unfolds. The autumn winds began to carry hints of the harsh winter approaching as Sarah Bennett stood in her kitchen, the 3rd plate in her hands, feeling like a physical representation of the decision she needed to make. 3 weeks had passed since James Coulter had ridden up to her homestead with a lame horse, and in that time he had transformed her struggling operation into something that resembled a real working ranch again. The immediate repairs had been completed within the first week, but Coulter had kept finding new projects, building a proper chicken coop to protect their hens from predators, repairing the well house, reinforcing the barn's foundations against winter storms. Each completed task revealed another that needed attention, creating an endless cycle that would have been overwhelming if it weren't also deeply satisfying. What surprised Sarah most was how naturally Coulter had integrated himself into their daily routine. He rose before dawn to handle the morning chores, worked through the day with focused dedication, and spent evenings helping Michael with the reading and arithmetic that Sarah had been teaching her son. The arrangement was so comfortable that Sarah sometimes forgot they had known each other for less than a month. The neighboring ranchers had indeed noticed the new presence on the Bennett homestead, and their reactions had been predictable. Some viewed Coulter with suspicion, wondering about his past and his intentions. Others saw an opportunity to make crude jokes about widows and drifters. But a few recognized him as James Coulter, the legendary ranch foreman whose skills had been sought by operations throughout the territory before his family's deaths had sent him wandering. "That's James Coulter working your place." Sam Henderson had asked Sarah during her visit to his ranch to purchase supplies. "He was the best foreman in 3 states before his family died. You're lucky to have him." The validation from respected ranchers like Henderson had silenced some of the gossip. But Sarah knew that the arrangement would never be fully accepted unless she and Coulter formalized it somehow. The question was whether a practical partnership could ever be something more, and whether either of them was ready for that possibility. The answer came unexpectedly during a crisis that reminded Sarah why having a capable partner was about more than just completing chores. An early winter storm swept across the prairie with little warning, bringing winds that threatened to destroy everything Coulter had repaired and snow that could trap livestock in dangerous conditions. Coulter moved with calm efficiency, securing buildings and herding animals to shelter while the wind howled around them. Sarah and Michael worked alongside him, following his instructions and trusting his experience. By the time the worst of the storm had passed, they were exhausted, frozen, and covered in snow, but the homestead had survived intact. That evening, as they thawed out around the stove and ate a late dinner, Michael fell asleep at the table from sheer exhaustion. Coulter gently carried the boy to his bed while Sarah cleaned up from their meal. "We make a good team," Coulter observed when he returned to the kitchen. "We do," Sarah agreed. "I'm not sure I could have managed that storm alone." Coulter sat down at the table, his expression more serious than Sarah had seen it. "I need to tell you something about why I've been drifting these past 5 years." Sarah settled into her own chair, recognizing that whatever Coulter was about to share would be significant. "After my wife and daughter died," Coulter began, "I blamed myself for not being able to save them. I was the foreman of the biggest ranch in Montana, but I couldn't protect my own family from disease. I walked away from everything because I didn't trust myself to care about people again." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But these past weeks here, working alongside you and Michael, I've realized that running from grief doesn't honor the people we've lost. They'd want us to keep living, keep building, keep caring about others even though we know how much it can hurt." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks as Coulter's words resonated with her own experience. "Jacob would want me to be happy again," she whispered, "but I didn't know how to imagine happiness without him." "Maybe happiness isn't about replacing what we've lost," Coulter suggested gently. "Maybe it's about having the courage to build something new while honoring what we had before." The conversation that followed was tentative and careful. Two wounded people exploring the possibility of creating something together without betraying the memories of their departed spouses. They talked through the night, sharing stories about Jacob and about Coulter's wife Elizabeth and their daughter Mary. acknowledging the love they had lost, while admitting that they were both tired of being alone. By the time dawn broke over the snow-covered prairie, they had reached an understanding. Coulter would stay permanently, not as a hired hand, but as a full partner in both the ranch and in raising Michael. They would marry eventually, when enough time had passed that it felt right rather than rushed. But in the meantime, they would continue the comfortable partnership that had developed so naturally. "One thing, though," Sarah said, as they watched the sunrise together. "I want you to know that the third plate was never just about convenience or having an extra hand around. From that very first dinner, something in my heart recognized that you were meant to be here." Coulter smiled, the first truly unguarded expression Sarah had seen on his usually careful face. "I knew it too. That's why fixing your gate felt like fixing my own future. Like every repair I made was actually rebuilding my own life." The wedding took place 6 months later, a simple ceremony attended by neighbors who had come to respect the partnership between the widow and the drifter. Michael stood proud beside his mother, delighted to have a father figure who treated him with respect and taught him the skills he would need to run the ranch someday. Years later, when their expanded homestead had grown into one of the territory's most successful ranches, visitors would ask Sarah and James how they had built such prosperity from such humble beginnings. Sarah's answer never varied. "It started with a broken gate and a lame horse," she would say, smiling at the memory. "And with having faith that a stranger who fixed one thing might be willing to stay and help fix everything else." But privately, when she and James were alone, Sarah would run her hands over the 3 plates she had saved from those early days, remembering how a simple act of setting an extra place at the table had been the first step toward rebuilding her life and her heart. The broken gate that James Coulter had repaired on his first day had become a symbol of their partnership, and Sarah made sure it was never replaced. When it eventually wore out decades later, she had the wood preserved and mounted in their home with a simple inscription: "Some broken things, when properly mended, become stronger than they ever were before. What a beautiful journey from loss to love." Sarah and James proved that sometimes fixing broken things means healing broken hearts. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more amazing tales of hope and new beginnings in the Old West. Share this touching story with everyone who believes in second chances at love. What was your favorite moment in this tale of healing and partnership? Let us know in the comments below.